Nothing like working third shift at your local drugstore. I'm a 26-year-old female who's about 5'0" and generally harmless looking. I have no idea what it is about being seemingly harmless, but it tends to attract a whole array of bad news. Don't believe me? Go ask a soft-spoken, tiny girl who gives you the first impression of isn't she just adorable, and more than likely, she'll have enough stories to make you worry about your sanity. This is compounded by my overall attitude of, I'll be sugar, rainbows, and sunshine right up until you give me a reason not to. A job in retail makes the whole mess about as fun as bamboo splinters under your fingernails. Whoever came up with the idea the customer is always right needs to be shot, resurrected, and shot again. That said, I'll do anything within the limits of my job for a customer. I like helping customers out. Most retail workers do. A little lesson is to be had here for those who have never worked in a service-based company. Most employees want to help you. Let them and you'll both walk away from the encounter in a much better frame of mind. If they don't, you should ask yourself if it's a situation beyond their control. If the answer is even anywhere close to, it might be, let them off the hook. I've seen too many retail employees get a look of dread on their faces when something goes wrong, as I, myself, am out being a customer. It bothers me every single time because I know what it's like to think, great, now I'm gonna get yelled at and called names for something that isn't my fault, or if they're mad enough they might even call in about me, and then my boss will be wondering what in God's name I'm doing. Do you know what said employee can do about it? Sit there and take it, while apologizing for your inconvenience, but I digress. I work as an overnight supervisor at a 24-hour drugstore. We get plenty of creepy people in, being a fair-sized city with only two 24-hour pharmacies in town. I have some really weird stories. Maybe I'll tell a few more at a later date. The evening of this particular incident had me working on a Saturday night with two other front-end employees. Saturday nights mean add tax. We overnighters, the few, the lucky, are the ones stuck with this joyful job. It means 10 hours of monotony and a lot of back and forth around the store. Usually, the nights pass with some regulars, some meth heads/drunks, some regular meth heads/drunks, and the occasion sick person or person with a sick loved one at home. Most intoxicated persons are in and out like a flash, but I've noticed that the more out of their wits they are, the higher the potential for creepy is. So, you learn to watch the ones with nervous twitches. It was about 1:30 a.m. when this taller, wiry man walked into my store. His dark brown hair was cropped pretty short and he was dressed fairly casually. I didn't even realize his presence in the store until the cashier for the night, Daniel, came up to me and muttered something about the weird guy wandering around the front of the store. Daniel is middle-aged, but mischievous and crotchety are two very apt descriptions of him. You never quite know when he's just stirring the pot, so I searched the guy down to see what was bothering Daniel. I had been thinking it was more than likely he'd noticed something strange about the guy and was worried about shoplifting. This would not be the first, or last, time his so-called shoplifter turned out to be some poor, exhausted father or husband sent out to get cold medicine. I found him pacing along the front wall and asked if he needed any help in my cheeriest customer service voice. The moment he turned around, I froze. This man radiated subdued violence. It surrounded him like an aura of menace. I couldn't pinpoint what was bothering me. The weirdly still expression, maybe? Or the way he was standing? He was unnaturally tense during my whole experience with him, like he was ready to go off at the first provocation. Truthfully, I still haven't quite figured it out, but he was just off enough to send up red flags just looking at him. Immediately uncomfortable, I was all too happy when he muttered, "No. I'm, just looking." I never have figured out how to gracefully exit the situation when a customer has nothing left to say to you but still stands there, staring, which feels almost expectant, even if it's not. After a minute or so of avoiding meeting his eyes, I told him my usual line, "All right, well, let us know if you need anything." I backed into the aisle I'd emerged from and hurried off to busy myself with more ad tags. Daniel could keep an eye on him if he felt like it. Dude was scary, and I was the only female on shift. No thank you, they don't pay me enough. It's not long before I start to feel like I'm being watched, and creepy suspect number 1 is lurking at the top of the aisle, staring. I finish all of the tags in line for that aisle, and I'm relieved when I have to move across the STO. An unexplained visit. Throughout my 33 years on this earth, I've experienced many things that I cannot logically explain. First off, once when I was 10 years old, I had gotten a painful infection in the cuticle of my middle finger on my right hand. I've always been a hypochondriac, and every time I looked at the painful swelling with my fingernail pulling away from the cuticle, I would be sent into a panic because I was convinced the doctor was going to have to cut my finger open. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor, but I was so petrified over the situation with my finger that I began sleeping in a den that was adjacent to my parents' bedroom on the 1st floor, which made me feel more at ease. On the eve of going to the doctor, I was awoken by the feeling of someone sitting on my legs. The den was pitch black, but I could see the outline of a person sitting on the couch I was sleeping on, and it was sitting on my legs. This person was massive and tall, seeming to be well over 6 feet. The person seemed to be facing away from when I first woke up, as if it was just staring at the wall or maybe waiting for me to wake up. When my eyes first opened and I couldn't move my legs and I saw the humanoid outline in the dark, my blood ran cold. It scared the shit out of me that someone had gotten into my house undetected. Our house had thin walls, and I could hear my mother and father snoring just across the hall in their bedroom. On top of that, our dog OD was extremely protective. OD would bark and freak out on any stranger, yet he was soundly sleeping in the hallway. On top of that, we routinely locked our doors before going to bed. How did this person get past the locked doors, past our dog without waking him, and past my parents' room without rousing them? After about 30 seconds, the outline of the person turned towards me and leaned forward a bit, towering over me. I felt paralyzed with fear, and then it spoke. It said, "Everything's going to be okay. Go back to sleep." When I heard its voice, it had a calming effect, and a sense of trust washed over me. I believed everything was going to be okay, and I fell back to sleep. I got up the next morning feeling a bit uneasy but unusually well rested. My mother brought me to the doctor, and we got a prescription for amoxicillin, and he told me to just let the fingernail grow out and another would grow back. My worst fear was put to rest. To this day, this experience sticks with me. I wonder if that thing/person came to ease my pain, because even though the infection was no big deal to an adult, to a scared child it became nightmare fuel. I told my mother and father all of this years later. It gave my mother chills. My father, on the other hand, didn't know what to say and hasn't mentioned it since. Brimstone story. These events happened to me about 4 years ago when I spent a year working at one of the largest theme parks in the UK. This place is about half an hour from where I live, and while I won't name it directly, I'm sure a few of you can guess where it is. I worked there as a ride assistant and worked on several different rides, including 3 of the big coasters and a couple of the dark rides. For those who don't know, a dark ride is a ride that is completely indoors. The most common example of this is your typical ghost train. Now, one particular ride is based partly inside the ruins of the family estate from which the park gets its name. The ride tells a pretty well-known local story about the family that used to own the estate and a supposed curse that they were afflicted with. The ride would start with an indoor queuing area, before moving guests into a cinema that told them the story, and then to a place known as the Octagon Room, where there would be a small effect-based show. Then finally guests would unknowingly exit the ruins and board the actual ride, which was a haunted swing-type affair. The actual ruins are well known for being potentially haunted, with programs such as Most Haunted featuring them, and after my time on that ride I can 100% agree. One night during October, which is when the park stays open till 9 p.m. to allow guests to ride in the dark, I sat at the end of the queue line. A member of staff is always stationed here to ensure that there aren't too many people in each group, and B, to greet the guests. Now usually after about 5 p.m., the ride became pretty deserted as most people wanted to ride the roller coasters in the dark, not walk through some very dimly lit buildings, so my job was really easy. At the end of the queue line, there was a small station with a television screen showing security camera feeds and a direct phone line to the ride operator's cabin. The cameras focused on the outdoor entrance, the entire queue line, and the cinema area. There weren't any blind spots either on these feeds. Now this night I was doing my usual thing, checking Facebook, playing Angry Birds, and keeping one eye on the monitor when I spotted what I guessed was a young couple making their way up the winding queue, zigzagging their way toward me. I locked my phone and shoved it in my pocket, as sometimes the managers like to try to sneak up on us. As the couple got about 3/4 of the way to me, I turned around to give them a friendly wave and to assure them that the ride was still open and that they would have the place to themselves. They were gone. I stood staring for a moment in complete puzzlement. There was no way that they could have run out of the room without either opening one of the loud heavy fire doors or jumping over about 20 sets of metal bars that made up the queue. As my brain processed this information, the hairs on the back of my neck rose and a sudden chill ran through my very core. Needless to say, I was very relieved when a coworker came about 10 minutes later so that I could go for my break. While that was an isolated incident, the next thing happened several times but never really fazed me. Throughout my life I have had a fair few paranormal encounters and have a certain sense of when something is around, and whether it is malign or not. In the building, the octagon room was the last section of the ruins that guests passed through, and believe it or not, was a fairly large octagon-shaped chamber. Usually, after the show finishes, a thick, heavy curtain is pulled back by a machine to reveal a secret tunnel that guests must follow. About 4 months into the season, this machine broke, and the maintenance staff realized that the part they needed wouldn't be available until after the park closed in November, so rather than pinning back the curtain, the decision was made that one ride assistant would have the fun job of standing behind the curtain in the pitch black, and once each show had finished they would pull the curtain and allow the guests to pass through, making sure nobody was left behind. More often than not, this duty fell to me. I enjoyed my time sitting in the dark, and after a week or two I knew the exact timings of all the light and sound cues of the show, and also scared quite a few people who weren't expecting some guy to be stood behind this mysterious curtain. In fact, many people thought I was a wax statue, and I would play on this before moving slightly whenever they went in to take a closer look at me. However, every so often I would get an immense oppressive feeling wash over me. The room would feel much darker than it had a couple of seconds before, and I would always get the distinct impression that there was some sort of male presence just behind me. Although I never turned around once, because fuck that, I always stood my ground. I knew this presence did not want me or anybody else there in his area, and he made that quite clear to many other members. I was stalked at a JCPenney. I have to begin this before the day I was stalked. I was sleeping on my parents' couch when I had a really strange dream. The dream consisted of a few strange things. I was dreaming that I was sleeping on the same couch I was asleep on when I woke up, in the dream, to the slam of a car door outside. Thinking my parents came home late at night, I looked outside. I saw one of the strangest, most demonic creatures hobbling across my front yard. I felt uncomfortable, so I rushed down my hallway to get a phone and my brother's gun. The next thing I heard was a huge thud on the front door. I started loading the gun and looked out the peephole. All I saw was fur reflecting in the light. It was the creature, trying to break down the door and kill me. I couldn't remember where, but I read 3 words that still scare me to this day. "I'm watching you." I then woke up for real with my heart racing. I then heard a car door shut and I looked outside. It was just my mom. I had told her about the dream, and she then told me she had to go to JCPenney. I decided to go with her just because of how scared I was. I then went shopping with my mom, and I decided to look at the men's department. As I was looking at some different ties and shirts, I noticed a man watching me. He then quickly looked away while picking up a random item within his reach. I didn't think much of it, but decided to look back in a few minutes. As I looked back, I noticed that he looked away from me quickly like before. I had to go to the bathroom, but I felt a little uncomfortable. I decided to suck it up and go, just thinking I was being paranoid. I had gone in the bathroom and did my business. The man then walked in and walked up to a urinal. I got a bad feeling in my gut, then looked back at him while washing my hands. He was watching me, then he noticed I was looking at him. He smiled at me like I was his next meal or something. I had started to walk out of the bathroom and he quickly zipped up and started after me. I ran to the end of the aisle and just started looking at other things. I then saw the man start to look at some things near me. I walked over to a couple of aisles. The whole time, the man wasn't far behind. The man seemed to be in his late 60s or early 70s, and I was around 9 or 10. I had heard different stories of people kidnapping kids, and it freaked me out. But after being followed, I ran out of the store and hid in a nearby store watching the door. After a while, I decided to find my mom. I was watching everywhere around me and finally found her in the JCPenney. I freaked her out when I found her. I then remembered the words I read somewhere in the dream that morning. I'm watching you. After that, I've never seen that guy again, but sometimes I'm reminded of him and I think back to that time and feel strange. I'm 20 now, but the memory of that day just scares me sometimes. Was it somehow related to my dream? Maybe. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. But that's my story. The lesson is this: please watch your surroundings at all times. You never know what people are thinking or what they're capable of doing. The guy in the red truck. I had something really scary happen to me when I was around 18 years old in the early 1990s. I was really into cars back then, and I liked working on my own cars even though I'm a girl. I had a 1979 Z28 Camaro with T-tops, and in the summer, I would go cruising around with my friends looking for something to do. One evening while driving up and down the main street in a neighboring city, I noticed a small red truck following us at a distance. I was with my friend Jenny, and I mentioned to her that I thought this truck could be following us. I pulled into the driveway of a fast food restaurant and noticed that the truck pulled into the restaurant 3 driveways back. I drove out in the other direction and he did the same. Again, I pulled into another driveway and the truck pulled in 3 driveways behind. I did this several times and the truck kept following, always staying about 3 driveways back. Jenny and I decided that we should just head towards home, which was about 30 minutes away. We thought that the driver of the truck would just give up and let us go, but he did not. He just kept following. It was now getting very late and we were beginning to worry as the truck had now been following us for about an hour. We did not want to go home and have him follow us there. I decided that the best thing to do would be to drive to the nearest police station. I told Jenny what I planned on doing, and to my horror, she grabbed the steering wheel and pulled it, causing the car to veer sharply right. "What the hell are you doing?" I screamed at her. "You're going to make us crash." It was bad enough that I had to worry about the truck following us, but I now had to worry about my passenger freaking out and causing us to have an accident. "No, we can't go to the police," she insisted. It occurred to me right then that somehow she thought that this was our fault. That somehow just by cruising around, she thought that we had done something to provoke this. I reluctantly drove away from the police station. We approached a bridge and were stopped by the red light on a one-way street. The truck was directly behind a car that was next to us. The car turned right, allowing the truck to pull forward. I looked over, and to my horror, this guy had stepped out of the truck and was standing next to the passenger side of my car with no pants on, and he was masturbating. This guy didn't have his pants down around his ankles. As a matter of fact, he had none on at all. I had the disturbing feeling that he probably didn't even have any with him this whole time that he had been following us. I hit the gas pedal and ran the red light going over the bridge. Somehow my friend didn't see what that guy had been doing just outside of her window. When I told her, she just kept saying, "No way. How the hell did you not see that?" I asked her in disbelief. It occurred to us that this guy would likely rape us if he had the chance. I drove up and down a few one-way streets back over the bridge and out into the country. He followed us for what seemed like forever until we were able to finally lose him going really fast out in the middle of nowhere. We went home and tried to forget about it. For some reason I never told my parents, and I'm not sure why. A few weeks later I saw on the news that the police were looking for a guy in a small red truck. He was wanted for rape. They showed his picture and it resembled the guy that had followed us. I thought that their description of the truck was a little different than the one we had seen, but maybe not. I always wondered if it was him. I'm just glad that we never had to find out.